Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee of the new municipal year. As you will see, we have a jam-packed agenda this evening, so we have allocated some rough timings to each item to try and make sure we can give each of these important items the time they need. Please may I ask that if you have a question, they are short and to the point to help things move along. It would be really helpful when asking a question if you could refer to the relevant page and item number. With all that in mind, let's get things underway. I don't believe we're expecting a fire drill this evening, so if the fire alarm does go off, please leave the building in an orderly fashion and head towards the car park. Eddie, have we got any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Quinn, Louise Ashbury and Mal Vaganum. Councillor Rowlands is kindly here as Councillor Quinn's substitute.
Thank you. The minutes from the previous meeting, are we happy to agree those minutes, members? Agree. Thank you. And I'll just sign the minutes. Okay, third item on the agenda is members are invited to declare any interests they may have with respect to matters which are to be considered at the meeting. Members who consider they have an interest or invited to consult the monitoring officer or democratic services officer prior to the meeting. Has anyone got any declarations of interest? Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. I don't have a declaration of interest as such, but I have been advised to state that in the interests of complete transparency, I took part in some of the meetings which took place under item 8 on the agenda, so that members are aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft.
Just for clarification, if you're on a committee like the Surrey Youth Sports Council, do you have to declare anything or like that? No, that's fine.
Not for this, thank you.
Not that we can see anything on the agenda.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, the first item is the annual performance report, which I believe Miss Kipping is presenting.
Thank you so much, Chair. The annual plan is the delivery vehicle for the 5-year strategy. The strategy reflects residents' priorities following the largest public consultation ever carried out by the Council in the summer of 2021. A cross-party task and finish group led the preparation of the strategy, which was agreed with cross-party support in October 2021. This report covers the performance of the Council across all services between the 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 2023 against that agreed plan. This report went to Executive for noting on the 20th of June 2023. Usually the report would come before this Scrutiny Committee before it travels to Executive. However, due to the elections and the need to publish the report as soon as possible, on this occasion, it was taken to Executive first. Executive noted the report and said that should this Scrutiny Committee identify any material issues that required Executive review, it should go back to Executive prior to publication. The annual plan is necessarily ambitious with the aim of driving up performance. It is an essential document for officers as it sets direction and focus and is used to set individual objectives during the officer appraisal process. The report is divided into sections reflecting the priorities of the Council: environment, health and quality of life, economy and responsive council. Each section has a number of activities and projects which were agreed in March 2022, and Council performance against those activities are reported with associated commentary using a green, amber, red traffic light system to show whether the activity or project has been completed, is in progress, or for whatever reason has not progressed. 98% of activities were completed or partially completed, with 79 totally achieved, which is an improvement on attainment from the previous year. There are also performance indicators in the report which again show green, amber and red, depending on how closely the indicator has been met. As can be seen from the covering report, some projects were delayed due to circumstances outside the control of the council, for example, the Turf Hill car park improvement work. Some projects have been rescheduled to maximise funding, for example, the fitness trail at the Lightwater Country Park. Other projects were delayed due to delays in recruiting to posts, for example, the climate change event and the posts to support health integration and prevent hospital admission. This is in part due to a difficult employment market. I can, however, confirm that we do have the new climate change officer in post and also the health integration post started last month. Projects that have been rescheduled will be carried forward into this year's annual plan where appropriate and where they remain a council priority. The report is for your scrutiny and we would welcome your questions. We have already received from the Chair a number of questions and they have had some answers which were circulated earlier today and hopefully the committee will have had a chance to at least have a look at. Once the report has passed through this process and if needed a return to the executive, it will then be published on our website. We welcome your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Kipping, and thank you for clarification of the fact this has gone to executive and it's for note originally. I have kindly had answers to the questions I've asked, so I'm not going to re-ask them now, and they've obviously been circulated to all members. So I'd also like, just before we start, thank you and your team for pulling together this annual plan. There's a lot of pages to it and there's lots of information, so thank you for all the time and effort that goes into that. With that said, have we got any questions? Councillor White and then Councillor Rowland.
I was waiting to see if any of the committee wanted to speak first. I don't mind waiting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Chair. I've only had a chance to preliminarily go through this, but it's quite amazing that there's no reference to the St Michael's ward in any part of it. And this is quite alarming in that St Michael's has been picked out by the county as an area of social deprivation. Perhaps one of the officers could point to any section dealing with St Michael's, but I didn't immediately locate any. And must be an urgent requirement to do something about St Michael's under these headings.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rowland. Do you want to?
We go on here. So I'm Bob for a second. Oh, there we are. Other way around. Councillor Rollins, thank you for the question, and Chair, thank you for allowing me to answer. So the simple answer is I'm not aware of any targeted intervention in the annual plan specifically for St Michael's. Clearly, a number of the actions will have benefited all parts of our community and all wards, but you're right, nothing specifically targeted in that area. Thank you.
May I suggest, if there's anything specifically you think that there is in your ward that needs to be talked about for the annual plan, that's something you feed back to the relevant officers, and that can obviously be considered for future annual plans. Councillor White.
Thank you. I think Mr Stevens knows what I'm going to say. Page 13, regarding the playground replacement at Whitmore Road, I notice it says rescheduled. I understand the reasons for that, but this was supposed to go through in autumn 22. Is there any scope of a date on this? Because it is embarrassing and I'd like to see something done ASAP.
Thank you for the question, Councillor White. I wouldn't necessarily say embarrassing, I would say frustrating. From an officer perspective, we have been engaging with County. The Chief Executive personally convened a meeting between relevant officers from the Borough Council and the County Council to make sure that this was pushed forward. We are in the process of agreeing a lease for the play space itself in isolation and not the wider site because of complexities around land ownership and access. What I will do is I'll speak to the Leisure and Recreation Services Manager and get an indicative timescale for you and share it with the rest of the committee.
Thank you, Councillor White. It's actually one of the questions that was on my sheet as well, and there's actually a formal answer, which is, and that's fine, it's not a problem at all, because you're not on the committee, so you won't have seen the answers. I can make sure you get that as a copy as well. Thank you. Councillor Wheeler and then Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Mine relates to the 80% target and 92% target on page 37 in relation to planning enforcement. I feel that's a slightly disingenuous mark there. I wish that it accurately reflected what was happening with enforcement. We have a number of enforcement issues, and I have a ward that generates an awful lot of them. I think measuring first visit or first action, which is a relatively straightforward thing to measure, isn't really representational of the outcome of enforcement. And I feel it would be better to have to this committee something that shows the number of actions that are outstanding as a percentage versus the number of actions that were closed. It's very easy to make a first contact. It appears to be increasingly difficult to follow something through to either the completion of the enforcement or the acceptance that the enforcement action isn't valid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Who wants to take it? Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. It's a very valid point, I will admit. It's very difficult to find a performance indicator that's meaningful. And clearly, if we had one that set a resolution time, I'm not convinced that it would actually mean anything, because as you well know, we have some cases that are long and painful and protracted, sometimes not because of any act or inaction of our officers. It's largely down to the appeals mechanism and the timescales that can take. So if we were looking at the lifespan of a case and how long it took to close, that could artificially impact on that statistic. If there is another performance indicator you think might work, quite happy for us to convene a meeting with officers and we can work that through and look to implement it for the next annual plan.
Thank you. I think maybe cases opened, cases in appeal, cases closed, cases in Neverland would be for very good indicators for us moving forward.
Is that something you're looking to add to the annual plan, or just as an aside, as a separate bit of information that comes back?
Thank you, Chair. I think adding that to the annual plan and actually having a target for closing those, because enforcement is like the sword of Damocles, both for the people that are impacted by the action that prompted the enforcement action, and also for those that are waiting for an outcome, whether that be an appeal outcome or for our action. And it causes a great deal of stress all round. Thank you.
Is that something we can send back to the executive as something to add to the annual plan, Mr. Stevens? Thank you. Mr. Wheeler. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask two questions? 2 points, thank you. My first one is on page 59, the number of meals at home. I was a bit perturbed to see the note that a small number of departures from service due to finance, i.e. that they'd stopped having meals at home. And I wondered whether there was any other help offered and what was the procedure in that case. That's my first point.
Do you want to give both your questions and they can be out then both answered?
And the second point was on page 69, ECON 06, item 2, the Surrey Heath Independent Network. As a business owner and employer in the borough, I've never heard of it, and I wondered where I find out about it.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Are they both under you, Mr. Stevens? And the first one. Do you want to take the first one then?
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Yes, it's an increasing concern in terms of the cost of living crisis and the affordability of any foodstuffs, let alone meals at home provision. And we recognise that what we're doing is serving our most vulnerable residents with meals. But clearly the costs of the council are escalating, not just the cost of the meals themselves, but obviously the cost of running the vehicles, maintaining them and fueling them, alongside staff costs. So there are additional challenges and budget pressures for us as a council. It's a timely question because we have the local joint commissioning group tomorrow. And one of the things that we are hoping to pose to that group is whether or not there's an option for a contribution towards our meals at home provision to actually offset some of those increasing costs. So it's a work in progress. We are mindful we don't want vulnerable residents dropping off our lists because it's quite an essential service we provide.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Is that something that can be looked at by the relevant portfolio holder as well? Because obviously, I'm assuming it's already on the agenda, as you just mentioned it, but if we're losing people from this service and they are the most vulnerable, the last thing we want them to do is not being fed because they can't afford it. Is that something that we can make sure the portfolio holder is aware of? Who do we decide who? Oh, it's you. Mr. Stevens, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Noble. So the Independence Network is new. It was established because when we looked at what would make our town and our borough attractive to retail and attractive to customers in a very competitive environment, we realised that right now about almost 55% of our retailers and restaurants are already independents. They're not part of a national chain. And that increasingly, it's the independent offer that gets people out to visit them, particularly when it's excellent customer service and something really special that you can't get on Amazon. And so we wanted to strengthen our approach to independence by, in effect, creating a network, because what they don't have as independents is that infrastructure that you have when you're a McDonald's, or you're a Marks and Spencer's. So they could share intelligence and they could give each other mutual support, and also we could attract more independents. We would love to be seen, I'd say, across the Surrey County as the place to come for independent shopping and dining. And this was just a way of taking that next step and creating that sense of community. In fact, that was probably an agenda that you were actively involved in.
I've now, having looked at the item, thank you, Mr. Roberts. I now know what this is. So I think the issue with this was it was a transition between the previous economic development manager. She left. It was basically done, I think, about a week after she left, and I don't think it's probably been picked up again since. I went to the first one, and it had been advertised probably Camberley-centric, so that's obviously something that does need to be taken on board. It was very poorly attended, even having advertised it there. But it's obviously something we can pass back on to the economic development team to see if it's something that can be further vitalised. Have we got any more questions? It looks like no. Okay, I was just asking for clarity. So are we happy to agree this paper with the comments that we've highlighted to go back to the executive? All those agree? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We're now leading on to item 5. Councillor McIntyre is actually on holiday, so Mr. Watson is presenting all the next papers. Over to you, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors, and welcome to the first P&F committee of this administration. The first report you've got in front of you is the revenue outturn report. It's a report on the outturn position of the council's revenue budget. Just for clarity, a revenue budget is one that's basically our day-to-day running costs of the council. There is a glossary, I think, at the end of that report that shows the difference between that, but I do know, for those that are new to local government finances, revenue in everybody else's business means money coming in. In ours, it's day-to-day expenditure and day-to-day income. The obverse for us is capital, which is longer-term expenditure. So in the outturn report, we're showing an underspend of just over £100,000. I think it's 112,000. And for me, that's quite pleasing, because when I first came here 19 months ago now, the first thing I was presented with was a monitoring report that said we're 1.6 million overspent. And the majority of the reason why that number was there, and that was not the final outturn position, I hasten to add, was because some of the budgets we'd set at the time, or the council had set, were potentially not as realistic as they should have been. So one of the first things I did when setting new budgets was trying to get a realistic and sustainable budget at the start of the year, and then by using the accountancy team and the service managers, who are the budget holders, through close monitoring, looking and seeing where we go, adjusting to it and responding to the variances that come out throughout the year. And the level of variance we were experiencing even this year has never been anything of the magnitude that was there previously, and it's been tightened up throughout the year through careful management by the service managers and supported by the accountancy teams. Within the report, you do have a list of variances over £25,000. I won't go through each one individually, but I'm sure if something's piqued your interest, you will know how to ask a question. And if I can't answer it, or any of the other officers here today can't answer the question, I will obviously undertake to give you a formal answer at some point very soon after this meeting. What's also going to go to the executive is the carry forward requests of budgets. This is basically to bring forward any budget that was not used for the purpose it was requested for in the last financial year, but the requirement to spend and the requirement to provide the service or the goods still exists. It's brought forward from the last year into the new year to avoid undue pressures on the current year financial budgets. And they are on the list on one of the appendices. And my final one is I have tried this time to put in a glossary of terms. I do hope people have found it useful, but if there's a term that you don't know about or want more clarification on, or just have heard a word somewhere, let me know and I'll make sure it gets updated as a living document as that part of the appendices for ongoing monitoring reports. At which point, Chair, I'd like to hand over to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watson, and thank you again for you and your team for putting all this information together, looking at all the figures. I have got one question. I did email it to you and you did give me an answer, but as we probably haven't issued that one out, I don't think, I'll just re-ask it again. It's reference to 2.2. It relates to the carry forward, and it's specifically for the, I think it was health and quality life. It was a grant, and I'm just wondering, is that a time bonded, or we can, because it's been carried forward, I'm just concerned if we don't spend it within a certain period of time, it disappears.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It is generally when we receive grants that we do expect to spend them. Unfortunately, sometimes there's preliminary work that needs to be done around the grant investigation, and most times with the grant, we would either get confirmed that we can carry it forward, or they want it paid back to us. But either way, I have to carry it forward in accounting terms, even though I have to pay it back. I don't want to pay it back. I'm sure Ms. Kipping can probably give us some confirmation whether they have to be paid back or not, or can we spend them? We're going to spend them, aren't we?
It's always our intention.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Sorry, has anyone got any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Mr Watson, thank you for preparing these. I know you've put an awful lot of work into them and your team. So on page 90, additional grants and elections income, including elections grant, audit grant and income from Bisley Parish for by-elections in November 2021. I didn't understand what the income from Bisley Parish for by-elections in November 2021 was.
Mr Watson?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Noble. When we hold elections on behalf of other bodies, because as a returning officer we have to hold those elections, we are entitled to make a charge against them. So it would have been a Bisley Parish election, not a council by-election. And as that stands, we can charge them for doing that or parts of it.
Same with the county.
And same with the county, and the same with the central government ones,
Yes.
which is always a good money spent. No, it's a good way of getting income in or of solving the cost of our elections, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Watson.
And my second question, at 1.10 we've referred to Star Chamber. I know we've talked, or Executive talked about base budget review. Can we use that terminology in future rather than Star Chamber, please, in documents?
Yes, certainly. The reason why it was called the Star Chamber is because it was looking back at last year when it was called the Star Chamber. All future references, as you'll see in the later report, for the current process is a base budget review.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Any more questions? Councillor Kang.
Just for my informational clarity, page 90, additional income including 34k for sanctuary scheme. What is that?
Is that, I'd say, Sally. Sorry, Ms Kipping.
Yeah, the sanctuary scheme is a scheme to help victims of domestic violence, and they support people going through, and we receive a grant for that. And the sanctuary scheme, we receive a grant for that, and it's to support victims of domestic violence.
And is it annually?
We believe it is.
I think it is, having been portfolio holder for that at one point. I think it is an annual, but it's not a given either, I don't think. It can vary and it might go, because I think, does it ultimately come from the PCC or Surrey Police? Is that where it comes from? Okay, yeah, but it isn't a given that it would be that figure every year. It does vary. Councillor Wheeler, sorry, brain.
That's right. It's actually just a reminder of people with the some of the challenges that we have with people hearing our recording. If we move this closer, it does come louder. I'm struggling to hear some of the officers, and I'm sure that those people listening online will also be.
Thanks, Councillor Wheeler. Any more questions, councillors? Okay, it doesn't look like there is. Thank you very much. Okay, members, again, this is one to be noted and sent back to the Executive with any comments we've made, which have been noted. Are we happy to approve that? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so item number 6, capital out return. Back to you, Mr Watson.
Thank you again, Chair. The capital outturn report is the report on the capital expenditures of the council, and I refer to my previous introduction, the difference between capital and revenue. Capital is basically the acquisition of assets, the maintenance of assets to keep them in use or bring them back into use, and needs to be something that lasts over 12 months and has a significant, in our case, about £10,000 value on the programme. The difference between capital budgets and revenue budgets is that revenue budgets are set for the annual financial year, running from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. Capital budgets, again, are set at the same time, but they can actually span one or many years, depending on the size of the budget and the length of the project. So they can do there. What we do, though, in this council at this point in time is put all the budget for the project in the first year, and then if it needs to be rephased to later years to meet the profile of that asset being developed, we will rephase into later years. So you can see in the report an element of rephasing. Last year, as we did the monthly or the quarterly budget monitoring, we identified projects to be rephased, and therefore what we have at the end of the year is a smaller amount of rephasing, but the total of the amount is as per the report going forward. There have been some projects that have finished and are recording an underspend. That money doesn't go back to the general fund. The way capital is funded is that we spend the money, and then at the year end we do the financing adjustments to support that, and we will finance it from capital receipt reserves we have, any grant income we have coming in for the specific purpose of the capital programme, and ultimately, if there's none of that available, we will use borrowing to fund the programme. We haven't used any borrowing additional this year for our capital programme.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I didn't actually have any questions on that one. So, councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Rowland.
Yes, Chair. Can I refer to page 110, the Camberley Theatre? Have no ideas of improvement come forward in regard to the theatre? I mean, it has a very small auditorium, and that's a problem about viability. Just wondered whether any ideas about improvements and developments of the theatre have actually been brought forward. Thank you.
I mean, just the first thing I'll say, and I'll then add, Mr. Stevens, obviously there was a refurb done last year, which I can't remember the figures, but it was a significant amount of money. And I know the website is also being has been updated as we speak. But if I hand over to Mr. Stevens, if there's anything else.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowland. There isn't anything else to update on in terms of the scale or size of the theatre itself or increasing the size of the auditorium. As it currently stands, our plans are limited to, obviously, making it a successful enterprise and also making sure that in relation to climate change, it's as efficient as it possibly can be through photovoltaic cells, improving the insulation there and obviously improving the heating and ventilation system. That is as far as the current plans go. If there are any suggestions that you do have, Councillor Rowlands, I'd warmly welcome a conversation with yourself and the relevant portfolio holder, Councillor Skipper.
Just one thing I'll say, and I know it's in the base budget review, I think it says in there that it was the most successful pantomime that the theatre's ever had at 100. I can't remember the figures. I'm sure you will be able to.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure I won't.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to it later.
It was by far the most successful pantomime in terms of the ticket sales. Yes, you're absolutely right, and I completely missed the opportunity to herald that, so sorry.
Sorry, Panto never. Okay, Mr. Rowland. Councillor Rowlands, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Rowlands, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Any suggestions or? Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Kang.
Just a clarification. Page 109, capital community schemes, community bus. You've got an old bus to replace. What's the bus used for? I'm not sure. And are you going to be replacing the electric one?
Is that you, Mr. Stevens, again?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kang. So the community bus scheme is part of our community services arrangement with Runnymede. That's obviously the shared arrangement that covers Windle Valley, Meals at Home, community alarms and community transport. There's a relatively ageing fleet there. It is coming to the end, or at least some of it is to its serviceable lifespan. The intention was to replace one of the minibuses, but we're aware that there's a Surrey County Council scheme where they will match fund for electric vehicles. So we are waiting with bated breath to find out greater detail on that so we can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Any other questions? I have just one reference to disabled grants. Sorry, disabled facility grants. Is that, if memory serves me correctly, is that one that we get funding for on an annual basis, but if we get more requests for adaptions, we can apply for more money? And sorry, you're right, sorry, I've told them to say what page. 107, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, is on page 107, disability grants, DFG at the top. I seem to remember that it's not an unlimited fund, but if we run out, it doesn't mean we can't facilitate people's houses. Is that correct or not?
It's a very good question. Thank you, Chair. I would need to check with the housing manager and get back to you. I believe we can. I believe it's an option to carry forward. So we received just shy of £900,000 from the Better Care Fund. That is set aside for adaptations through the Home Improvement Agency. And clearly the carry forward we have here is in relation to work that's already commenced but for which we haven't paid yet. We do have a lag because of the pandemic in some of the works coming forward. So we're confident that we'll spend that and potentially more this financial year. I will obtain an answer from the housing manager and share it with you.
Thank you, because I know in the base budget there's also a mention about the OT funding, which I assume means that there might be an increase in facility grant, disability grants because of that, because there has been a backlog, and I know there's been a backlog because there's not been an OT. And sorry, did you want answers? Sorry.
Just to clarify a bit around it, Disabled Facilities Grant is grant, as I say, we get money from the Better Care Fund. The reason why we have the carry forward around and the rephasing is because generally it's down to the individual receiving the grant to commission the works. And we can help them with the commissioning process, but obviously that takes time, which is why we have to then have agreed an award to people. We then let them do the commissioning of the works and things like that. You're right in saying that whenever the Better Care Fund gets money returned to it from councils that haven't required to spend it, they will normally do a second round of bids for people to bid for what they need. So they will tell us what they have and like that. They've changed the guidance a bit more this time to say that adaptions to properties can also mean occupational therapy, equipment and support, because the idea is to help people remain in their own home as long as they can. So there is more things changing, but again, I'm sure Mr. Jimman will be able to provide more information if the committee do need it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Watson. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Mr. Kane.
Again, I just been thinking, page 11, a space in the aircraft for camera is too small. Currently, there's no solution to this technical issue. If you cut a bigger hole, the aircraft might fall. What's that all about?
So that was page 111. A space in the aircraft for camera is too small currently. There is no solution to this technical issue, as if to cut a bigger hole, the aircraft might fall apart. Is that the drones? Is that the video of the borough? Okay, so it's a technical issue. So basically, there's a project where we're going to photograph the whole of the borough with a drone, and I think that relates to that.
So doesn't Google's sort of satellites and Google Map, do you not buy in information, or is it?
So Chairman, yes, we have an X mapping software that has various layers. Some of them are commercially available from a number of different sources, including where Google get their sources from. But there are other layers that either need more detail or a different kind of detail. And they're used by many different services, including our planning service. And this is argued as a necessary part of that. It's just another layer in that system.
And I think it's fair to say the Google maps are always well out of date. I think 10, 15 years out of date. So if something's been built, it wouldn't necessarily appear on a Google map as well. Okay. Oh, I almost got away with it. Councillor White.
Thank you. Page 113, item 12, 63A, the High Street bag shot. The refurbishment I know has finished. Has this facility been advertised yet? And if so, are we getting any return on this yet? If it hasn't been advertised yet, why not?
list.
Yeah, I thought it was the last thing I knew was my portfolio.
In fact, do you want to say that then? 'Cause it's correct.
Yeah, so I happen to know, because it was my portfolio, that just before handing over, it had all been leased, from what I understand from Mr. Breeden, to a single user. So it has been leased, and that was probably, May, June time? I think we're waiting for it to be finished, and they would be, but I'm sure the officers, if you ask, they can give you more details, but I believe it's been fully leased. Okay, I will try again. We will, if we're all happy to agree, again, note this back to the executive with the comments that we've made. Are we happy to agree that? Agreed. Oh, sorry.
No, it was an agreement. I think
Okay.
it was.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to the Treasury Management outturn. All these outturns. Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Yes, it is the end of the year, or the accountancy year, so we have a celebration. The Treasury report is again a report on the outturn for the last financial year. This report is one of 3 reports on Treasury that have to be presented to the Council in some form, either to the Council itself or to one of the committees that the Council chooses to delegate to. In this case, it's delegating to Scrutiny and to the Executive to review this report. Just to say that from the start of this financial year, there will be 5 reports being produced on Treasury. So if you think you've got to read them, I've got to write them. It does show where we are in the Treasury. Obviously, a difficult year for Treasury in the last year, as we saw the bank rate starting to rise. And as you would know from your own sort of private areas, the rate for what they charge us, it goes up faster than the rate for what they pay us in terms of that. So the Council has had to find extra financing to support its position, although we have the money in the budget for that, and we have locked in previously over the last 18 months or so 2 longer term deals at a fixed rate to give us some stability. But we still have a fair size of the portfolio that is on short-term borrowing. Now, you may question the wisdom of short-term borrowing in rising rates, but when the rates start to go down, and the forecasts are that rates will turn round, as inflation reduces, the base rate will change down, and we don't want to be caught locked in at rates at the peak for a long term. So we're going to follow down, see the rates come down with our short-term borrowing, and when we find to a point where the Council will make a sensible longer-term borrowing commitment, it will do that and lock in a fixed rate. All our borrowings are done at a fixed rate, but obviously short-term borrowing changes each time you have to refresh it. So it almost acts like a semi-variable rate when we refresh those loans. The advantage we have had during the year is that we have overachieved on our Treasury income coming in, because we're seeing more rates, better rates coming forward when we start investing our money. Now, I know the question will be, why have you got debt and why are you investing money? And the answer is cash flow and liquidity. We always invest our money based on when we have spare cash and capacity. But if you imagine every first of the month I receive a large receipt, not me personally, the Council, I must stop saying that because someone would pick me up. The Council receives a large receipt of council tax money, business rates money coming in. Now that money comes in, and at some point we have to pay it over to the county, their share of it, we have to pay it over to the police, we have to pay some over to the government on the business rates, but that's not on the same day. So I will be investing the money we have for a short term until it's required to go out. So that's the liquidity part about it. I don't want lots of money held in the current account when I can earn some return on it. So we do that during the year, normally with the use of money market funds, which are AAA rated in terms of their security, because of the complete breadth of their asset base, and they also give us the flexibility of instant withdrawal on the process. So that's there. Occasionally we will lend some longer term. So if we do receive a large grant from the government or something that we know is not going to be used until we've worked up what we're doing it, we do that. So the team is very keen to understand not just when money's coming in, but when that money then needs to go back out again. And that's what drives our treasury performance going through the process. I will reiterate once again, any investments we make are done in the order of security of the money to make sure we get it back, liquidity of the money to make sure we get it back at the right time, and the last thing that the team are concerned about is the treasury yield. So whereas we do put a target in the budget for our yield, I would never risk the money by chasing a yield curve. It also confirms in the report and say that we've not breached any of our prudential or treasury indicators. So prudential indicators are our level of borrowing that we set at council in the treasury strategy. And our treasury indicators are things such as the counterparty list, who we will lend money to, and we restrict it very much tight to government or government-backed organisations or financial institutions that are rated, I think it's currently A plus or above, so we are very prudent. In fact, all our investments are with either the government, the money market funds at AAA, or with other local authorities who are backed by UK government.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I'm going to go to Councillor Wilson first, because he actually sent a few questions in and they didn't actually get sent answers back. So I said I would give him the preference to ask his questions first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got three separate different paragraphs, so if it's okay, I'll ask three separate different questions because they're not really
Please
related. The first one is about paragraph 1.18, which is on page 128. And it says, so is it possible to estimate what the interest rate on borrowing will be for the current and future years? And is it correct to assume that the interest paid on the council's debt will not be less than the UK government pays? So that means gilt yields for the same duration.
Do we want to answer each question that comes up? Is that Mr. Watson? I've actually got them written down here, actually. Do you want that?
Yes, okay. Thank you for the question. It is, when we set our annual budget for the current financial year, so when it goes to February Budget Council, in the medium-term financial strategy, we will have done a calculation on our interest that we would be expected paying. That's based on the knowns, which is the fixed-term, long-term Public Works Loan Board debt at a fixed rate, the loans from the Phoenix company that again is fixed on the rate at the time, so that won't change. And then we'll look at the amount of short-term debts that we expect to roll over, borrowing, that we expect to roll over during the year. On that, we will have to use an interest rate forecast given to us by our Treasury advisors, which is Link Group, and they provide us an outlook. So that bit is the bit we're making an estimate on when we do it, but we do put it in there, and we have that number in the revenue budget for debt servicing. At the same time, we'll make a provision for debt repayment as well, be it through an annuity, and some of the loans are, or be it through a minimum revenue provision, which is basically a provision we set aside from our revenue budget and goes into our capital adjustment account. So we'll have the money available to repay the longer term maturity loans as and when they become due. In terms of interest paid on the council's debt will not be less than the UK government pays. I can't take that as a, I can't confirm that because we tend to borrow, if we borrow longer term, from the Public Works Loan Board, and that is actually gilts plus a small premium. I think depending which rate you go for, they give a certainty rate, they give a housing rate, they can give a standard rate, and it can go from anything like 75 basis points above gilt to, and it's 10-year gilt, to 120 basis points above it. But we've not taken any longer term debt on, and because of our capital programme being quite small in the next year, we will try not to do that. In terms of where do we borrow short-term local authorities, the rates that tend to be not selected, but set by the authority that's lending, and they will come out and the brokers will work for us and for them, and we can agree a mutual rate. The short-term money is obviously less than the longer-term money, which is why we use it. And hopefully, as I said before, once the rates start coming down, we can start thinking about maybe locking in some more longer-term money. But again, part of the reason why we hold short-term is if, for some chance, there's money available to repay the debt, you can't repay locked-in debt until it's actually due. So we need to keep some of the portfolio quite short-term to allow us that ability.
Great, that answers the question, yeah. So you're saying it's for something like a 30-year loan or a 10-year loan, it would be above the gilt rates. So the gilt rate for a 30-year gilt at the moment, the yield is 4.3% annually, and today, and for 10 years it's 4.7%. So comparing that to the average that we're paying at the moment is 2.13%. I mean, tell me if I've got this wrong, but it looks like if when the loans roll over, that potentially the interest is going to double or treble. So it would go from 3.6 million a year to 10 million a year. Is that a risk to the whole council's finances?
It is a risk. It won't be quite as dramatic as you say, and that's not a criticism. It's just that the money we're talking about rolling over is a short term. So we're talking 12-month, 24-month money. So it's below that rate anyway, and because obviously 10-year gilts is a lot higher. The longer term debt is fixed and locked in already. What we have done, and we fund it in two ways. Currently we're funding it from money that we get from our property portfolio, which is what most of the debt is acquired to purchase at the time, and that's set in the budget. So they will have an income target or an income receipt coming in, and from that I will deduct the cost of financing, debt financing, revenue provision. Now, if you could look at the medium-term financial strategy and the Treasury strategy that went in February, it does show our debt profile, our debt financing. It does show a deficit for next year because we know that interest rates have gone up higher and we're in that position there. What the council has done in the good years, as you could call it, has taken money that we made over and above our cost of debt financing and put it into an interest equalisation reserve. So in the medium-term financial strategy for 23-24, there is a planned drawdown from that interest equalisation reserve to make sure we have sufficient money available to service our debt through the financial year.
That's great, thanks. That completely answers that. If I can, my
Sure,
next one
answer
is a really short question.
Yeah, it's
super
please,
short one.
if you could.
It's basically just on heading 6. I haven't got the page number for that to hand. Bob, you gave a really useful briefing to new councillors in May, 2 months ago, and you stated that there's no danger at that time of having to issue a Section 114 notice. Is that still the case? And if so, are there any threats in the future that might change your opinion?
So I stand by my decision. The strange thing about a 114 notice, it's a 1143, I think, is subsection 3, is that you can't issue it whilst you're solvent and trading. You have to go bust and then you issue a 114 notice, which seems that it's closing the door. You know, sorry, we have gone bust. So I will stand by the decision that I'm not going to issue a 114 notice in the very near future. Again, I refer back to the medium-term financial strategy. It does show a depletion of our general fund balance over the 4 years, and potentially, unless something is done or something changes significantly, there could be a danger to the council's financial situation if we just sit around doing nothing. Now, that sounds doom and gloom, and I'm sure it would be front headline in Camberley Eye, the 151 officer declares doom and gloom. I will temper that by if we don't do anything about it. And the idea is, while you have a forward look in the medium-term financial strategy, is to allow us to know that we're heading towards a cliff edge and we can take action to either avoid it or stop the vehicle or whatever. So that is a challenge going forward over the next few years, and it's already been addressed, I believe, in the short-term plan of the administration to look at trying to get these budgets into a balanced position. It's not going to be an easy task, but when we come on to the paper on the base budget review, I can probably give a bit more confidence about why I don't think it's not an insurmountable problem. But it is a problem. I will keep the platform burning as such to say that there, and it's there. What I would actually say is that we are not the only council that will be setting a medium-term financial strategy for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years that is predicting a complete drawdown of balances. Some have already predicted it during the next financial year. Some will be 2 years out. There's some that are going to be, yeah, we're happy, we know we've got bags of reserves. But you've still got to do the process that says a balanced budget. So hopefully that gives some reassurance to people, but I can't say everything's great.
It does, thank you. And if I can, just one more, it's change of subject, this one.
That's your last question.
It's my last question. Paragraph 6.4, you talk about a downward valuation of the council's investments. Is it possible to put a figure on the downward valuation of the council's investment in the Camberley Mall, the shopping mall? And do you know what the maintenance and running costs are and how that compares to the income? Thank you.
Yes and no. I do know the downward valuation. I don't have it to hand. As part of our preparation of annual accounts, and I had a session on this last night, we get a valuation done every year. So just because we haven't published the accounts yet doesn't mean we haven't got the valuations. I do have the valuations. I'm not trying to hide it, but I don't want to give the wrong figure. But I can let people know what the current valuation, as at the 31st of March 2023, is on the MAL. It's nothing like it was when we acquired it, but that's the same across everybody in there. The strange thing with local authority accounting is that we don't need to recognise the downward valuation in our usable reserves until any point in time as when we crystallise that debt by a loss on disposal. It will be a paper adjustment through our unusable reserve. The capital adjustment account is the reserve to look at if you so wish to. It is fairly impenetrable. That's not my fault and it's not intentional. That's the way we are specified to do our accounting. I do indicate, yes, last night, that I intend to publish the outstanding accounts in draft format as I get them available to go in the next few months, and that will have that valuation in there. The major write-down in value was in 2021, and since then it's just slowed down to a trickle. It's still going the wrong way. But the key thing about the assets such as the square is that so long as we're able to keep financing the debt, and we are, as I've explained in my previous answer, there's no intention to sell it. We wouldn't sell at the bottom of the market. We didn't buy the square for investment purposes. It was purchased for civic amenity and to provide a town centre for residents of the borough. And that's why we've got no shareholders saying, Bob, can I have my dividend? Because we don't do that. So I don't need to liquidate the value of the assets. So we were keeping it intentionally for a long-term hold. And those who have followed the property market will know that it goes in cycles. We're at the bottom of the cycle, which is why we are not looking to dispose of. You could argue, and I'm not going to suggest we do it, that this is the time to buy property if you can afford to do it, but that's taken as a prudent decision how it washes its face. The income and running costs of the MAL are mainly recovered, sorry, the maintenance running costs are recovered back through the service charge to the tenants within that mall. The council does pick up some of that because it owns some of the property itself. In there, it picks up on the voids. There is a budget set aside for that in the budget, and that does not come out of the money that's been set aside to finance the debt and the debt servicing. So the answer to the question is, it's in there. The amount of income it generates should be, it is available in the income report, or I can get you the figure that we got from there. But the budget will tell you what it's in there, and we meet budget. In fact, we exceeded budget again, I think, this year. So
That's great, thanks. I mean, that's why I asked the questions in advance, to try and give you a chance to provide the numbers. Would it be possible to have them sent to me?
Yeah, and the apologies. One of the main reasons for not getting them out early enough was partly because of the peer review.
Yes, the peer review that the council's going through at the moment has a significant element on reviewing the council's finances, and as you can imagine, had a lot of questions that needed to be responded to, and they're only here for a very fixed period of time. So unfortunately, the two requests ended up coming at the same time. But we're very grateful that you asked the questions in advance, and if it hadn't been for that, you would have absolutely had the answer already.
That's great, thanks.
Okay, right. Anyone else got any questions? Councillor Mears.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one from me. On page 128, 1.21, the column headings have the order of magnitude as millions of pounds. I just want to check whether that's right.
Mr. Watson, I think it is, isn't it? 7.8 million,
yes. The magnitude's right, the commas are in the wrong place. Yeah, no, it is, no. So the UK investment, total investments, is 38.9 million. It should be a decimal place, not a comma. I would be really smart and flash and say, as we are following the European system of demarking commas and full stops, but I won't, because we didn't. It's a typo, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Mears. Actually, having worked for a French company, I didn't even notice that because I see a comma as being a full stop. So
I was working to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Any other questions?
Chair, I had partly Councillor Wilson's last question, I think, addressed the point that I was going to make around some of our larger assets and the role they could play, either directly or otherwise, to a council finding itself in Section 114 territory. But I was in discussions with some colleagues elsewhere in the organisation today, and we were reminded about a report that Grant Thornton, a very well-respected body that also do audits in local authorities, financial accounts, that in October last year were predicting that this financial year, 1 in 6 councils nationally will run out of money. And I think that's a measure of just how challenging the environment is in local government right now. We, I think, as Mr. Watson has said, are not in a position where we are going to run out of money this year. But I think there are lots of councils that are looking on the short and medium-term horizon and seeing that point ahead of them and having to take action, as Mr. Watson has said, to make sure that either they significantly increase their income or they significantly reduce their costs in order to make sure that they don't reach that end point of running out of money. It's a very difficult time for the sector. And I think, relatively speaking, we're doing much better than some, but we are definitely not complacent.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Thank you for clarification. Oh, Mr. Watson.
Just to add to that, we set last year, so in February 22, a medium-term financial strategy that was looking to close our budget gap. And someone said to me, you know, what other problems do I foresee? And the answer, I don't know. But when we set the budget in February 23, I had to readjust everything because we were experiencing ultra-high inflation. Although some people from the 70s say that's not ultra-high, but I think that's probably gone. And that meant that our contracts to people paid, our staffing costs, and everything else had gone again. So the reason why we have to refresh our medium-term financial strategy every year is because we get certain things coming along. And, you know, when I was doing the budget in February 22 or January 22, I didn't predict a war in Ukraine. I apologise. But it was one of those things. But we did know soon after budget setting, unfortunately. And other things like that. And then the interest rates going up, the Bank of England, inflation across the world. It's one of those things. There's so many unknowns sat out there that we can only budget around what we have got and what we do know. I wouldn't be thanked if I turned around to any of the administration and said, oh, by the way, you can't spend any money at all because there might be something I don't know about yet, but I know there's going to be something. So it's that we have to deal with knowns where we do know them and make assumptions around what they might mean for us. So could something come around the corner next year? I don't know. But the predictions are that inflation is going to come down and interest rates are going to come down. So that's what I'm working on when I look at the budget setting.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. And I think what we were saying, we need to add a line to the budget for a crystal ball. Is that what we're saying? Councillor Wilson, did you have another question? I see your hand up.
Just a quick point on what Damien said about generally councils 1 in 6 having trouble with their finances now. Is that largely or exacerbated due to the recent increases in commercial property that councils have been getting involved in, like we have?
Do you know, I mean, it's really a question for Bob to answer, but if I could start. I think property investments are certainly a significant element of that. But I think also that the hard truth is that local government have had, in effect, year-on-year cuts in expenditure. Significant growth in demand, significant additional responsibilities, but at a time when you look across government, the local government has definitely been the poor relation. It has not been protected, and for a long time, most of the cuts in public spending, or the highest proportion of cuts in public spending, happened to local government. And I think one of the wake-up calls nationally was when COVID came along, and local authorities were called upon to mobilise and, you know, deliver essential medicine and make sure that people had access to, you know, the food and looking after more vulnerable people. I think there was a realisation that councils have been cut so far that there really wasn't the capacity that had been assumed. And so I think even without the property dimension, I think councils have increasingly struggled, and many councils, I think, without making property investments and generating income from that route, might have already got to a point where they would have run out of money 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Did you want to say a little bit extra?
Yes, only to add to it that, as Mr. Roberts said, that is the situation. Most councils were forced into some form of income generation to make up for the shortfall in income that wasn't being generated from government support, particularly in this area of the country. Councils all over there are now getting zero level revenue support grant from the government and things there. Is that the only reason? No, it's not. And is property the only reason? No, it's not. The councils, a lot of councils have outsourced a great deal of their major contracts. Those contracts will have inflationary uplifts in them, and those inflationary uplifts are set by the contract. So they're based on the prevailing rate of RPI, CPI, or whatever the current formula they're using is. So that has created a lot of pressure for local authorities because they're suddenly finding there. The days of cheap borrowing have ended temporarily. So a lot of authorities use money not to buy assets with, not to buy property, but to regenerate their areas, put in town centres, things like that. And of course, that cost, similar to us, will be increasing on your short-term borrowing debt. So it's a perfect storm of factors coming around there. Also, with the fact that we are capped with the amount we increase our council tax by. They lifted the cap slightly for us to do this year, but if we're raising it by 2.99% and prevailing inflation is 11%, you can see we're 8% worse off in real terms on that one. And the final point, it's not a politics point, because all parties have stated where their priorities are for spending, and it's the NHS, it's education, it's those things that people like to see. That's going to be paid for by somewhere else in the government budgets. They haven't got unlimited resources of money, so if you're prioritising areas like the NHS, like education, you won't be prioritising the other areas like local government. So therefore, we're not on the list of people that they'd like to prioritise money for. And my final point is the trouble with local government, we're too damn good. The government takes the money away from us and we just keep going. And perhaps this 1 in 6 is going to be the one that will break it and suddenly say, we've now broken local government. That could happen.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Councillor Wheeler.
It's a very quick point, and it might seem a little bit petty, but I can assure you the purchase of the MAL was represented to members at the time as an investment and not just a regeneration programme. I appreciate, Mr. Watson, you weren't here at that time, but that's what I sat in the chamber and heard, whether I supported it or not.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Any other questions? No. No. Okay. So, as with the other papers, this is one to be agreed to be sent back to the executive. Any comments we've made? Are we happy to agree this paper? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Next item, and the last item before the work programme, is the base budget review outcome report. And sorry,
Chair, just to apologise to Councillor Kang, when he raised at the beginning of the meeting whether he should declare an interest, I hadn't appreciated that there's an item on this. There's a
yes,
there is. That relates to his declaration. So through you, could I please invite Councillor Kang to declare his interest?
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Kang. So you've got an interest in. Do you want to put your microphone on?
Sorry.
So you've got an interest in Surrey
Youth Sports Council.
and that's an item on the next agenda item. Okay, thank you.
And could you clarify if it's a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest?
Yeah, is that a pecuniary? I can't never say the word
Non-pecuniary,
pecuniary or non-pecuniary.
non-pecuniary.
Are you a representative of the council on that?
Yes, I am
Okay.
representing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Bob. Sorry, Mr. Watson, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. For those who were part of the council last year, you will note that we did go through what was then known as the Star Chamber process. This is now a base budget review, which is probably a more accurate description because it is looking at the base budgets of the council and where we're going with those. Those with even better memories or who actually took part in the February Budget Council meeting will note that there was a line in the medium-term financial strategy, the revenue budget for this year and for the other 3 indicative years called savings target. I'm sure you remember former councillor Bates always asking me, are we going to achieve it? I hope he's listening tonight. As I did reassure him that I felt the target was achievable. So this report outlines what we did as a process, which followed a similar process to the previous year, but was involved the portfolio holders and the lead portfolio holder for finance and the leader of the council in a process of just putting a review of the base budgets of every single service and sub-service in the council. Everything was investigated, no stone unturned, as the phrase would be, to confirm where we think there's efficiencies and savings. I will use the terminology savings across this report introduction, but just to be clear, savings is a combination of service efficiencies, and a service efficiency is where potentially the budget can be taken out of the base budget. Sorry, for those who understand, base budget is the budget we use every year to stand still where we are. So if it comes out of the base budget, it's coming out forever, unless it's a one-off and so on. But the service efficiency is a reduction in that base budget that does not impact on service delivery. So it's where services have come up to the people in the review process and said, actually, I have a vacancy, for example, in my team. I don't need to fill that vacancy now or forever, and that becomes an efficiency. It doesn't change the impact on service delivery to residents, and it means that people can, my finance team, can take that budget out with any fear of reducing what we do as a council. We also include in the term savings, and this is where it gets confusing, additional income. So if we feel we can generate more income from a service, either by creating more demand or recognising that demand has actually increased historically, because when we did the budget back in 22-23, we did reduce the income targets in car parking, we did reduce the income targets on the property portfolio to be realistic. Those of you who've done budgeting will know that you can set any budget you like, but it's whether you make it or not is what's the important thing. So, you know, we made the budgets, my maxim of the right budget in the right place at the right time. And that's what we followed through. And that's been proven by the first report on the revenue outturn, as we got very close throughout the year, monitoring and the outturn coming in virtually on budget. So as part of that process, we look at income. But there also is the issue around income that might be an increase in the fees and charges. And one of those is in this report further down. That means it becomes more of a political decision rather than an officer decision, because as politicians, you will have to face this up with the residents. I'll just sit there and collect the money and thank you very much for doing it. So that becomes slightly more political, which is why we have the base budget review with portfolio holders, with senior members of the executive around there. And then the third one we have is a service reduction. And again, this is a political decision around it, so we make sure things go in the right category. So if it's an efficiency, it's a bit of a no-brainer for the people making the decisions around the review, but the other ones become slightly more difficult. And the idea that we may reduce services to people is something that has to be fronted up and owned by the executive, where this report will eventually go to. We have achieved the target of 500,000 in 23-24, the current financial year. A lot of that is efficiencies, so we should be guaranteed to make it because we haven't spent that money yet. But we have done a factor around some of the other ones. There might be a lead in time, and that figure still is, it's 529,000, I believe. Off the top of my head, I'm not looking at the report. Was there. We haven't achieved it in the future years. Now, part of that is deliberate, not deliberately done, but I haven't pushed to get it included, because as you go further into the 4-year strategy, the savings efficiencies that you identify don't become quite so confirmed as happening, because there might be more unknowns, there might be more things that happen. So I'm fairly relaxed that we haven't hit those targets in the later years. It will mean potentially that we'll go through the process again, but I think it's a good process that we've learnt from, and it does drive more savings and efficiencies out of the council by doing it in the way we followed it. And that is where we are in terms of numbers. There is a list of all the savings that are in there and the years. Some you will see a figure that is positive, and using accountancy terminology, a negative figure is good, in red and in brackets. A positive figure is not so good. And that's where you see a figure going in, it's basically reversal. The classic example in there is Treasury income. Because we didn't think interest rates were going to go up for the income we receive in Treasury, we said, we know we're going to get better return this year on our investments. But as I said earlier, there's a good side when rates come down, we pay less to service our debt. There's a bad side that the amount of money I get from our Treasury investments will drop down as well. So you can see that that has been prudently reversed out to the point. It's not totally reversed out because as you hit the final year, we don't believe interest rates are going to return to the ultra low. Yes, looking for the right word to use that was fairly polite, that we saw over the last few years. And it's very difficult. A lot of people have been spoilt by the fact that rates were running at ultra low levels. We're probably seeing a bounce back to more realistic levels, targeted around about 2% of the Bank of England base rate, which is what they're suggesting will happen over the next 3 or 4 years. At which point I'll probably talked enough about the report and I'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just clarify one point? So this is pretty much like last year where the leader and the finance portfolio holder sat down with relevant portfolio holders and the relevant leaders of each team and relevant officers, yes? And the chief executive. Okay, cool. Thank you. So, so just for clarity, because obviously I was involved in this last time, everybody was in the room and involved in these, so anybody that knows anything about the figures. And Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you. I've got a couple of queries. I'll sort of run them through in the order of the paper. Can I just check, please, the removal of the power station at the London Road Recreation Ground, is that the thing that was installed in Southwell Park Road to support the, I can't think of a good way to describe it, the ice ring debacle that went in? And have we been paying for it all this time to sit there as a sort of a blot on the recreational ground landscape?
Mr. Watson. Or Mr. Roberts. One of you.
The answer is yes.
Thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. The next one, I'm going to skip the EV charger one actually because it's not a biggie. The provision of meals to voluntary and community organisation support with homeless and school holiday provision. What does that actually mean? How many children are we not now going to provide that provision for?
Councillor Wheeler, what point was that?
So it's 4.13 community services.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Councillor Wheeler, I'm just trying to find the right one. Okay, so this is the 2023-24 and the 4024-25. It's not about a reduction in provision. It's actually about widening the scope of what we already offer. So effectively, this is income generation, if you like. So we're trying to find new markets, including those outside the borough. So we know that there are other boroughs that don't have meals at home provision. We're trying to tap into that market.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. The other thing is the introduce of charging for private functions and events. Which locations do these relate to, please?
Mr. Stevens. Which point is that? Is that 4.14?
4.14.
I think it's all under Camberley Theatre, looking at the heading, is it? So the heading is, I think it's all under Camberley Theatre.
That's lovely. Thank you. And then I've got just a couple more. The increasing for all car parks by 5% effective from the 1st of October 2023, as long-standing members will know on my views of charging for rural car parks. How confident are we that this won't actually make people go elsewhere? So we've already got increased antisocial car parking, certainly in the ward that I represent. So what kind of analysis have we done to make sure that we are remaining competitive with neighbouring boroughs, and this won't actually see, because last time our parking income was heralded as definitely going to be there, and it definitely wasn't there. So I'm just very mindful that we might be making the same mistake.
Mr Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I suppose the first thing, and maybe the conversation that we had earlier on in the evening around the financial challenges facing local government, one of the things that we look to do where possible is to ensure that as our costs go up, we pass those costs on to the users of the service. If we don't do that, then we end up subsidising the service from council taxpayers, many of whom aren't car drivers. It's fair to say that while inflation has been running into double figures, the costs associated with maintaining the equipment, the software, and the infrastructure of our car parks has become much, much more expensive. And we still have car parks where the council isn't just subsidising the theatre, but is subsidising the cost of car parking because, in effect, the council's losing money on it. So this doesn't represent an inflationary increase. Potentially it should, but it represents a significantly lower than inflation increase. We were concerned the last time the council put up its car parking charges that one of the outcomes would be that usage would fall away, and actually the council wouldn't deliver the scale of increase in income that we had projected. Now, of course, we applied some sensitivity analysis. We assumed that maybe there would be some fall off, but our experience so far is that our car parking income has actually exceeded in numbers than we had projected at the time. So at the moment, we don't have strong reason to believe that this level of increase will result in fewer people using the car parks. But it's always a possibility, and it's certainly something that we'll be factoring into the assumptions that we make when we build it into the budget.
Not for now, but could we please have shared with the committee members the revenue for 21, 22, 22, 23 by car park?
I would add you would want 19 in there as well, because that shows you the figures of what was before the pandemic.
Thank you. My next one is along a very similar vein, which is the increase of fees and charges for existing paid-for services, so in particular garden waste. We have a target to increase our garden waste recycling, and I am genuinely concerned that an increase in this cost, it's certainly one of the costs that I've already cut from my own household bills, is to stop my garden waste service. Marginal. Certainly if it went up again, I should imagine there will be a lot of people in a very similar situation, and I'm worried that this will then have a negative impact on one of our strategic objectives, which is to increase recycling.
Councillor Wheeler, thank you. Actually, I was going to ask exactly the same question, because by virtue of the fact that we're increasing the cost, people may stop using the service, which means ultimately we won't increase, we'll decrease. So, Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I would revert back to the Chief Executive's response to the previous question in relation to increasing costs for discretionary services and passing those on to the service users. There is clearly a challenge in local authority in terms of balancing the budget, and this is a discretionary service and one where we feel, due to benchmarking, that the additional increase for this financial year and next is tolerable. Clearly, we will be monitoring uptake of subscriptions for garden waste, and if they do start to tail off, then clearly we will review the subscription cost. But across the partnership of 4 boroughs and beyond, JWS have undertaken analysis, and even with the increase in cost, this is still competitive.
So can I just have clarification, please? Does this service make a profit, i.e. does it contribute to our costs, or is this a reduction? So is this a revenue red mark or a reduction in cost red mark?
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. It's income. It's income.
Fine. So although it's a discretionary service, it is income generating. So we do need to very carefully analyse that between our strategic objectives, I would have thought. My very last one, you will be pleased to know, is on...
Hang on, Councillor Wheeler, Mr Watson would like to say something as well.
Just to clarify, when we say it's income generating, it generates income to cover its cost. So it's not excess income generating, it's to avoid the fact that, as we spoke earlier, if you do not recover your costs around this, somebody is subsidising it. And the people subsidising it are the taxpayers who may not be using the service.
Can I ask a question then? Is it wiping its face? Is it making money, or are we just covering the costs?
The analysis that was done during the process was the fact that we have seen a huge increase in our costs of providing the garden waste service, the cost of the freighters, the cost of the fuel, the cost of the drivers, and potentially where we were wiping our face 2-3 years ago, we've fallen so far behind because of the increases that we've had to make the huge adjustment to bring it up to, again, wash its face, as David Dickinson would say.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
For absolute clarity, then, it's break-even point. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's very helpful. The last one, with, I'm sure, something that all of us have had our inboxes full of, is the reduced number of grass cutting in the borough. Seriously? If we were to take the officer time that it must take to deal with the complaints and the queries that come about as a result of grass cutting not happening, surely the amount that we're saving cannot be justified.
Mr Stevens.
This is fun, isn't it? Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. This was carefully appraised by the officers within our Recreation and Leisure Services team before it was brought forward. Now, clearly you'll understand the circumstances that we have with county and the transfer of grounds maintenance and verges back to the county council. On reflection, clearly the county council have decided to cut either 2 or 4 times per year. We are cutting up to 12 times per annum. And it's the view of the officers, the professional view of the officers that brought this forward to base budget review, that one reduction, a single reduction in cuts per annum was tolerable and manageable. Now, clearly the challenge that we will have is making sure that those cuts happen at the right time in the year to deal with seasonal fluctuations in weather, sunshine, rainfall, and so on. That will be the challenge for us, but dropping from 12 to 11, the view of the officers is that it's manageable.
And of course, we will pick up the litter and we will take our cuttings away with us, yes?
We will litter pick prior to cutting, and clearly we don't do cut and drop unless it's clearly not going to be noticeable. It will be noticeable on 4 cuts per annum, but not on 11.
So unlike county, we'll do it properly.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Reid, was that your last question? Okay, Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Item 4.17, Joint Waste Solutions, SAC provision, stop and or reduce provision of refuse and recycling sacks to properties that cannot accommodate a wheeled bin. My concern with that is if we're not providing sacks, then waste gets dumped, fly-tipped somewhere else. So I do have concerns with that. I don't know how many properties we're looking at that don't have a wheeled bin.
I'm sure Mr Stevens would love to answer that one for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Noble. I will find the figure. I do have it somewhere in the depths of this laptop in relation to how many households this relates to. I think the key wording here is stop and or reduce, and the discussion was around actually a reduction. So we provide these sacks twice per annum, and what we'd actually look to do is do that as a singular bag drop, if you like, and that would obviously be supported with some quite substantial comms from JWS to make sure that residents were aware of that.
Could we have clarity on that? Does that mean the same number of bags being dropped once a year, or does it mean half the number of bags being dropped once a year? I'm just thinking the majority of the properties that this impacts are flatted developments where they don't have their own bin. I have to say, if I lived in one of those flatted developments, I would be feeling that I was not getting as good a service as my 1 or 2 bedroomed semi-detached neighbour. And also, by the very nature of the fact that they're flatted developments, very often they have less storage space. So could we just have that clarity as well, please?
Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. And we thought this was going to be the Mr Watson show today. So the proposed reduction down to a single drop-off per annum keeps us in line with our partner boroughs across the Joint Waste Partnership. What the analysis that's been undertaken by Amy and JWS has found is actually not many of our black sacks, or sorry, a proportion of our black sacks don't actually find it into our bins anyway. The residents tend to use their own sacks and don't tend to utilise the ones that we provide. Mr Watson kindly reminded me, this only relates to the black sacks and not to the recycling sacks as well. So the reduction is the black sacks.
Can I just, on this, while we're talking about this, we're only talking about saving in 24-25. Why is it, if that's what we're planning on doing, why does it not carry it over for 25-26?
Thank you, Chair. That would be an accounting question, which Mr Watson can explain. It's a in-year saving for 1 year because then the base budget changes as a consequence.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Well done. You're even answering for Mr Watson now as well. Mr Rowlands. Sorry, Councillor Rowlands, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering about whether the incidents at the comedy fair, when there was a failure to effectively collect the refuge after the comedy fair and in the surrounding area, doesn't highlight the business that this is a tricky area and that you do mention fates and fairs here. We've got an example where we appeared to have fallen down in effectively picking up the rubbish after an event of that kind.
Okay, Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. It's a conversation I'd like to have offline with you, if I may. I've seen some narrative around this that's been shared by officers. Our officers are firmly of the view that that isn't an accurate reflection of what was on the ground after the marquee was taken down. A litter pick was conducted prior to 6 p.m. on the day that the marquee was actually taken off site, and I've got photographs to demonstrate that. So if there is a conflicting view with that, I'd very much like to hear it, because the recollection of officers is that location, London Road Recreation Ground, was left impeccably spick and span.
So I would suggest we take that item offline as suggested then, assuming it's not about this. Mr. Rowlands? So that discussion I think we should take offline. Mr Stevens is happy to speak to you face to face after this?
The section I read was there are other rubbish bins that weren't emptied as well in the area. This was a part of a general failure by the contractor, perhaps.
Yeah, I would suggest that you discuss that with Mr Stevens afterwards, because you can talk about it then. Okay, because that's relevant to a specific item, and I would suggest that's probably better served there. Have we got any other questions? I've actually got a few I highlighted, so if anyone else got any questions? No? So I did highlight a few, and I'm not going to go through them all. I know the EV charger, I know Councillor Reid said she wasn't going to mention it, but I will. Hey, Chair's prerogative. So it says we're going to install 2 additional EV chargers in the main square car park. So my question is, are we already using at their capacity the ones that are already there?
Thank you, Chair. I believe so, yes. I've got the analysis because I've got access into the pod point system that shows that they are very well frequented to the point where we need to increase the kilowatt hour rate that we are charging. Every single time I've tried to use them, they've been blocked by other EVs. So, yes, I believe they are, and I believe that we will happily occupy 4 chargers in that location.
But no more. Okay, thank you, that's fine. So, Oh, can I just, I'll just go for my next one and I'll come over to you. Unless,
It's just a,
yep.
could you
Fire away.
give us the reference for each?
Sorry, yeah, no, I'm
for
doing
each
exactly
one?
what I told you.
Thank you.
EVs on page, okay, sorry, and I'm going to do, so page 8, I've just got reference recreation and leisure, increase income from sports bookings. How? That's a really wide area to say we're going to increase £10,000, but how are we actually going to do that?
Thank you, Chair. This is actually income that is already being generated. Post-pandemic, we found that the demand for sports bookings has increased, particularly around cricket, and we believe that this is a realistic increase on our income for this year.
Okay, thank you. So is that the same with the 4.16 corporate enforcement, page 12, fixed penalty notices, payments received, we're going to increase that by 1,300, is that the same?
It's a similar vein, although I don't believe that they're pre-booked. That's effectively us using our portable CCTV, our deployable CCTV, and issuing fixed penalty notices as a consequence.
Brilliant, and I've actually got one last question, and that's just because I didn't understand it. 4.22 on page 15, commercialisation of entire Surrey Heath holdings, advertising and promotional sites, sponsorship, etc. We're going to bring in 10,000, 30,000 and 30,000. I'm guessing that's not Mr Stevens, Mr Roberts.
Thank you. I'm sure Mr. Stevens will be mightily relieved. Thank you. So this is the idea that we have a significant property estate and that by working with professional agencies that do this elsewhere, we can start to leverage that estate to generate more income. At a basic level, it could be sponsorship, something we've spoken about for the theatre for a while. It could be a significant company wants to sponsor it and then attaches their name to the service, or it could be about advertising on our buildings, advertising on staircases. It's looking at all the creative ways possible to generate primarily advertising income on the back of our buildings. Clearly, there are a number of challenges to get there. Difficult market, difficult economy. Some of those adverts might need planning, regulation, consent. There's a whole set of things, but there are companies out there that seem to have a positive track record, and we're very keen to maximise the opportunity to generate income where we can.
Thank you, Mr Roberts. Has anyone else got any questions? Councillor Kang.
Just to 4.19 on page 14, just clarification. Internship programs, do they cost the council money actually, or is there not any sort of grants which are come in? I mean, you're making a saving.
It's all right, the fact that she's still there.
Yes, I've forgotten for a moment.
This is skipping.
Thank you, Chair. So interns do sort of real work for the council, and so attract minimum pay regulations. We must pay interns when they are employed in projects to work for the council, and our interns are very useful. They don't attract, you may be thinking of the apprenticeship levy, and the apprenticeship levy must be used for training people rather than paying people. So we do have to pay our interns, and it does attract a cost.
And did you say you had another question?
Yes, I do. It was 4.21 on the Surrey Youth Games. Obviously, having visited the Surrey Youth Games in Guildford, which was very well attended, and I understand that there were 7 representatives or playing games, etc. So, are we trying to say that this is something that is too costly and we are going to do our own in-house program?
Who's got that one?
Is it still you? Oh,
Oh, there you go, we're skipping.
Hello, yes, it is me again. Thank you, Chair. So the Surrey Sports Games do attract a cost, and we do believe that we can supply an in-house cost-effective range of activities, and that it will have the advantage of encouraging sport throughout the year and not just in one very focused point in time. So we believe that we can deliver it in-house without the cost and with better outcomes.
And would that be this year or next year?
Yes, that's going to be starting with effect from the new school year. We'll be looking at how we provide that.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions? I'm conscious that Mr. Jinnah hasn't been asked any questions yet, so he's sitting there all ready to go. So I saw Councillor Whitcroft first and then Councillor Rowlands.
I've got general comments, if I might, so I defer to Councillor Rowlands, if I may, first. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rowlands.
Yes, I'm just wondering about the cut in the internship programme. Is it possible to find some other funding base for that? Somebody was wishing to promote possibly people entering local government or looking for alternative funding for it.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. Obviously, if we can find some funding, we will utilise it gladly, but at the moment we're not aware of any funding options available to pay intern salaries.
Thank you. And Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, I was involved in the early stages of this exercise, and I have to say that before I got into it, I was a bit dubious about it, to be perfectly honest. I had some experience some years ago of a zero-based budgeting exercise, and that's something which is often discussed. And I wondered whether this was going to be as effective. I have to say that the original name, Star Chamber, didn't appeal to me very much, which is one of the reasons why it got changed. But having gone through the process, I must say that the way it was carried out by officers and indeed the members that took part was very impressive, I think. It was certainly a far more efficient way of going about the exercise as opposed to a zero-based budgeting approach, which when I was involved with it, at least, involved all members of the council, and it was a very clunky exercise, to say the least of it. It was as successful as it was because of the efforts in the main of the officers, has to be said. There were one or two examples of people flying kites, I think it's fair to say, in the sense that some fairly ludicrous suggestions were made as to savings that might be made, and one had the feeling that maybe there was a bit of smoke screening going on here. That if you offer something really silly, then we'll just move on very quickly. But in the main, that wasn't the case. In the main, the suggestions which were presented by officers were extremely useful, and there was many examples, as you will have seen, of staff savings being made, usually with vacancies not being filled, and that had a significant impact on the whole exercise. And I think we can take some satisfaction from the fact that the total for year one was 530,000 against a target of 500,000, with still some checks to be done on some of the savings. So I think that's a tribute to the whole process, and it's certainly one that I personally would endorse for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. And you have not taken my thunder, because I was going to basically say pretty much the same, having obviously been involved in it last year. It was a really interesting process to look inwards and see, okay, what can we do? So I know every single person within this building is involved in that, so I would like to thank everybody from the top down for all their involvement and looking at and seeing what savings we can make, and also what we can bring into the council as well. I'm conscious of the time, and sorry, go on then, Councillor Kang.
Possible to Gavin, Do you, sorry, better, it's 4.10 housing, and it's page 9. Do you have a register of private landlords who are prepared to take on sort of families with obviously you giving a guarantee in terms of rent?
Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kang. We don't have a comprehensive register of private landlords, no. What we do have is an increasing number of private landlords who are approaching us because clearly as interest rates have risen, as have their overheads. And that means they're trying to find a more financially effective way of retaining a rental property. One of the things that we can offer to ensure that we can locate tenants within the private rental sector as opposed to just with our registered providers is the rent cover guarantee. And clearly that gives a degree of certainty to the landlords. There are other things we're looking at as well in terms of being able to support the landlords in greater depth so that actually they're not reliant on an agent to manage that property as well. So that's a work in progress, but at the moment we think that if we can utilise the rent cover guarantee, that will draw in more private landlords to accept the tenants on our housing register.
Just to come back on that, there are other councils which sort of license landlords. Has this area not gone that way?
So there are two elements of licensing. There is the licensing of houses in multiple occupation. So these are properties where you have effectively rooms let, but there are communal parts like kitchens and bathrooms. All boroughs are obligated to license those under the HMO licensing regime. There is also discretionary licensing, which some local authorities take on board as well. But that's generally to deal with problem landlords or to deal with large volumes of student accommodation. And it's not something that we have either of in this borough.
Thank you. And you've made me think of another question, and it might be Mr. Stevens. So it's reference family support 411. Having worked with the team before, it says a decision has been made, this is 4.1, the first one, decision has been made not to recruit to a vacancy and to share workload amongst the current officers. I know that they are a very, very busy team that have got lots and lots of work to do. So my concern is around the workload of that team by not having an extra member in there. Can we get some guarantees that that won't be the case?
Thank you, Chair. I'll give you the best guarantee I can give. The work of the family support team covers two main elements, so the family support, the early help programme, but also the resettlement schemes as well. And that work tends to fluctuate. So clearly the service will expand and contract to account for those demands. The base budget review, as has been referenced, has involved all officers within key positions within the council and a consultation as well with those particular teams. It's the family support manager's belief that this is a tolerable reduction in staffing resource and one that can be managed, and it won't have a detrimental impact on the service.
Okay, thank you. So I'm conscious of the time. This is another one we've got to take note and relevant comments taken back to the executive for next week. Are we happy to agree the paper? Oh, is it? Thank you. To resolve the proposal set out in section 4. So we've got to. Okay. And comments that we've. Okay. So in this instance, I've been corrected. We need to resolve that we're happy to recommend the paper to the executive for next week. Are we happy to agree that? Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Right. So that takes us on to the work programme. You've all got the work programme. I know that there was an email that came out that asked if you've got any comments about things that we would like to bring to the work programme that are not already here. Obviously, it's quite a full work programme, and I will be speaking with the officers along with my vice chair to see if what we need to do, what we can change, because I'm conscious that there's a lot to take in a very short couple of hours of time. But I just wanted to get a feel that can either be tonight or you can send an email to Democratic Services of, is there any particular areas because obviously we bring the portfolio holders in, and having done that, you bring the portfolio holder in, they write a paper, it tells you everything that's going on in their portfolio, and then you can ask them questions on it. But if there's a particular area, and the key words right now are deep dives, if there's anything specifically you would like to request that we look at, please let us know, and that's something we can take into consideration when we're looking at the work programme moving forward. Obviously, there is a time limitation, and we can't throw extra meetings in, but if there is anything that we've really got something we'll look at, then please speak and let us know what you want to discuss. That can be now, if it's not going to take forever, or we can do that via email. Has anybody got any relevant comments they want to make specifically? Quiet, good, okay. So, having said that, go on. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee. No, I didn't see.
That's all right. I was quietly hiding here, Chair. Thank you. I think it's linking back to the training that we had the other evening in terms of scrutiny, and I think it's thinking through that. Obviously, it wasn't an online meeting, so I don't know if there are any notes that could be perhaps shared for any colleagues that weren't present, because that was really, really valuable. I think it's making sure that kind of boring BAU stuff is just put under noted. I think some of the things that we've gone through this evening, I think I'd perhaps ask the question, were they the best pieces of scrutiny at this stage? It's easy to get lost in very deep and detailed reports, and I've heard from quite a few colleagues who've spent many, many hours reading those reports in their own time already, and I'm just thinking about best value and performance there in terms of delivering the scrutiny piece. Obviously, this is the first one, so you've now got your hands on the levers to fully shape it. And I think it's looking at specific topics to explore to deliver positive outcomes rather than those BAU routine reports. That would be my observation.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. It's certainly something that I've already discussed with officers. First thing I'd say is this, you're right, it is the first meeting, and a lot of these papers I think have been held over because obviously the election's in May. But I'm also conscious, it's one of the questions that I have asked and will ask, some of these papers have to come to scrutiny, I believe. A lot like the outturns and the finance ones, I believe have to come to scrutiny. Now, whether that's to be noted only or to be questioned, I mean, Mr Watson, maybe you're in a better position.
Certainly the council is required to produce outturn reports. It'll be observed upon if we don't in terms of governance. Now, you could say they don't need to go to scrutiny, they can go straight to executive, but the policy the council's followed is that by coming to scrutiny first, it gives you a chance to look at it rather than take it to executive, which could then mean a call-in decision, which means another Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee and another executive, and so on and so on and so on. So the idea is that we bring these sort of reports to this committee first, and then you can pass your comments, observations, recommendations onto executive in theirs, which is, I believe, the best practice to follow on these. These reports do have to happen. The other answer is that if we don't produce the outturn reports, how do our residents know what we spent our money on?
So I think it's twofold, isn't it? The reports have to be done, which is a given. It's a question of, do we want to bring them to the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, and that's obviously a discussion. I know, having spoken to the leader, he had a suggestion that there are particular things he might want to come to the Scrutiny Committee, which is fine, but I'm also conscious there is not an unlimited amount of time. So that's the reason why we've already had a discussion. We're going to put something in the diary to have a discussion. What do we have to bring to the committee? What do the committee want to see? And then we will build a work programme around that. So I do take on point what Councillor Lee has said. The training we had the other night was very interesting, and it certainly made my eyes open to a couple of things. So it will all be taken away, and we will look at it. Has anybody else got any comments reference to the work programme? No.
If I just reinforce some of what you've just said. So I think everybody wants to ensure that as a scrutiny function, you're able to have the greatest impact possible. Greatest possible positive impact on the organisation. One way of doing that is to ensure that you're engaging in some of the big ticket items that the council is covering off. It could be big budget items, and it certainly had some very big budget issues here today. It could be how the council's going to set out its plans, either for savings or for things it might want to do in the future, or new policy developments. If the council's going to exert significant effort and significant resources to achieve a certain outcome, getting in on that action and influencing it from the ground up, I think is a very powerful way to have an impact. Chasing things at the margins, maybe that the organisation isn't doing, you will have an impact, but it will be much more limited. And somehow I think the art of this is getting that balance right. Things that you generate, that you identify as important, that you focus on, but making sure the things the organisation is doing, that without your input will end up with a decision and an action, having the influence at the right time. And the right time is before the decision's been taken. And so that's what I thought I might offer.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. So what I would say is, I'll echo what I said. If there's if you have ideas that you want to add to the work programme or you would like us to look at, please send an email to Democratic Services, and we will be discussing the work programme moving forward. If no one else has got any other discussion points on the work programme, look at that. Wow. See, that's the mark of a pretty good chairman. 1 minute over. I apologise. I will try and get that back next month. Thank you very much for everybody's time and effort and reading the papers, because I know they were long. And have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.